Daniel Brooks was a quiet man who worked as a janitor in a tall glass building in the center of the city. Every morning he pushed his cart with buckets and brushes, cleaning the floors while the men in suits walked past him without even looking. They saw only a man in simple clothes, holding a mop, keeping the floors bright. No one cared about his name or his story.
Oh.
To them, he was invisible. The building was owned by Ethan Cole, a man who was known across the city as a powerful and wealthy CEO. Ethan had charm, but behind his smile was a sharp tongue. He liked to show his power not only to his business rivals, but also to those he thought were beneath him. He often mocked the staff, calling them names, making jokes that made others laugh and clap. The workers hated it, but they could not say anything. Their jobs depended on him. That evening, Ethan had arranged a grand party on the rooftop of his building. Bright lights covered the night, music played, and the city skyline stretched out like a sea of stars. Men in tuxedos and women in shining gowns filled the place, holding glasses of champagne. At the center of it all was Ethan, standing tall, with a proud smile on his face. Beside him stood Claire Morgan, a woman admired for her beauty and elegance. Her red dress flowed like fire, and her earrings sparkled under the lights. Everyone turned to look at her whenever she moved. Daniel was there too, though not as a guest. He had been told to keep the place clean and to stay out of the way. He stayed near the shadows, sweeping quietly, hoping no one would notice him. But Ethan noticed. He always noticed. His eyes locked on Daniel, and a smirk appeared on his face. He called out loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Look at this," Ethan said, pointing at the janitor. "Our very own floor sweeper. Maybe he dreams of more than soap and water." The crowd laughed. Daniel did not lift his head, kept sweeping, but his silence only gave Ethan more reason to continue. "You think you could ever be more than what you are?" Ethan said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Tell you what, if you can pilot that helicopter sitting there, I will marry you myself." He laughed at his own joke, and the crowd burst into laughter again. Claire looked at Ethan with shock. She did not find it funny. She turned her eyes to Daniel, expecting him to show anger, but instead, she saw calm. His eyes were steady, his face unreadable. The words hung in the air. The helicopter stood ready at the edge of the rooftop, black and shining, its blades glinting under the lights. Everyone thought it was nothing more than a cruel joke, another way for Ethan to humiliate someone. They expected Daniel to lower his head and walk away, to be embarrassed in front of all. But Daniel only placed his broom back in the cart. He looked up once at Ethan, then at Claire. His eyes did not show defeat. They showed something else, something that unsettled Claire deep inside. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the edge of the rooftop, closer to the helicopter. The crowd fell into silence, their laughter fading. For the first time that evening, Ethan's smile grew uncertain. Claire's heart began to race, though she did not know why. Something about Daniel's calm step, about the way he carried himself, felt different. She sensed a story behind his silence, a truth hidden deep that no one there could see. And in that moment, the night changed. Daniel did not say anything after Ethan's mocking words. He only walked toward the shadows again, leaving the helicopter untouched. The crowd began to whisper and laugh once more, thinking it was over. Ethan regained his smile and raised his glass to the guests, acting like he had one. Yet Claire did not laugh. Her eyes stayed on Daniel, who picked up his cart and slowly pushed it toward the elevator. There was something about his silence that would not leave her mind. Most people, when insulted in front of so many, would show anger or shame. Daniel showed neither. He did not look broken, nor did he look weak. He carried himself with a quiet strength, and that unsettled her more than the cruel words of her own. Later that night, after the guests had left and the music had faded, Claire walked across the empty rooftop. The helicopter still sat there under the city lights. She ran her fingers along its side, thinking of the strange moment she had witnessed. She remembered the way Daniel had looked at her, not with fear, not even with resentment, but with a calmness that almost felt like defiance. The next day she found herself looking for him inside the building. She saw him in the hallway, pushing his cart, the mop swaying gently as he worked. No one else noticed him, but Claire could not ignore him. She stepped closer and spoke softly, though her voice carried a question she had not planned. "Do you know how to fly a helicopter?" she asked. Daniel looked at her for a long second. His eyes were deep, carrying something she could not read. He gave a small nod, then turned back to his work. Claire felt her chest tighten. He did not brag. He did not explain. He only confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. That evening, she asked one of the older staff members about him. Mr. Harris, mechanic who had worked in the building for years, leaned closer when she mentioned Daniel's name. His voice dropped low as if sharing a secret. People think he is just a janitor, Mr. Harris said, but I have seen him before. Long ago. He was not always like this. He used to wear a uniform. He used to fly. Claire's eyes widened. Fly, the old man nodded. At planes, helicopters, you name it. He was a pilot, and a good one too. But something happened. I don't know the whole story. He disappeared for years, then came back as a janitor. Never spoke much about the past. Claire could not believe it. The man everyone ignored had once lived a life far beyond what they could imagine. She wanted to know more, but Mr. Harris shook his head. He does not talk about it. And maybe he has his reasons. That night, Claire could not sleep. Oh. She kept replaying the scene on the rooftop, the cruel laughter, Ethan's mocking words, and Daniel's calm reaction. She began to see her in a different light. Ethan had everything money could buy, yet he used it to belittle others. Daniel had nothing, yet he carried himself with a strength that Ethan could never understand. The next morning, Claire saw Daniel again in the lobby. She hesitated, then walked up to him. He stopped his cart and waited. She looked into his eyes and said, I believe there is more to you than anyone here knows. Daniel gave a faint smile, the kind that hides both pain and truth. He said nothing, but his silence spoke louder than words. Claire felt a shiver run through her. She knew his story was not simple. She knew there was a hidden past waiting to come into light. And deep inside, she wanted to be the one to uncover it. Claire could not ignore the weight of what she had learned. The thought of Daniel being more than a janitor stayed with her through the day. She sat in the grand office with Ethan, listening to him boast about business deals and profits. But her mind drifted back to Daniel's calm eyes and the words of Mr. Harris. Ethan's voice was loud, full of pride yet empty of meaning. Daniel's silence carried more power than all of Ethan's speeches. That evening, Claire left the office early and walked to a small cafe near the edge of the city. She had heard that Daniel sometimes went there after work. She sat by the window, waiting, and after some time, she saw him step in quietly. His clothes were plain, his steps unhurried. But there was something about him that stood out, even in the simplest setting. He ordered black coffee and sat in a corner, alone. Claire hesitated before walking over. When Daniel noticed her, he did not seem surprised, simply nodded at the empty chair across from him. She sat down and felt her heart beat faster. For a while, they said nothing. The sound of cups and chatter filling the air around them. At last, Claire spoke. I heard you used to fly, she said softly. Daniel looked at her with steady eyes. He did not answer at once. He lifted the cup, took a slow sip, and then set it back down. I did, he said at last. Claire leaned closer. Why are you here then? Why live like this? Daniel's gaze drifted to the window, where the streetlights glowed. His jaw tightened, and for a moment Claire thought he would refuse to speak. But then he said, because the sky took someone I loved. The weight of his words sank into her chest. He did not say more. But Claire understood enough. She saw the pain behind his eyes, a pain he carried with quiet strength. It was not shame that made him sweep floors. It was grief. When Claire returned home, Ethan was waiting. He noticed the faraway look in her eyes and grew suspicious. He asked where she had been, but she brushed him off, saying she needed air. Ethan narrowed his eyes, but said nothing more. Deep down, he sensed her thoughts were slipping away from him, and it angered him. The next day at the office, Ethan made sure Daniel was cleaning near the boardroom when guests arrived. He wanted to humiliate him again, to remind everyone of their places. There's our star pilot, Ethan said loudly, pointing at Daniel with a cruel grin. Maybe he'll fly us to our meeting today. The guests chuckled politely, but Claire did not. She looked at Daniel, and for the first time, she saw him straighten slightly, as if the words no longer touched him. Daniel's calmness unsettled Ethan. He wanted to see fear or embarrassment, but instead, he saw quiet strength. The CEO clenched his jaw, realizing that his power over Daniel was slipping. Later that afternoon, Claire found Daniel in the service hall. "Why do you let him speak to you that way?" she asked. Daniel looked at her with steady eyes. "'Cause his words cannot change who I am. They only show who he is." Claire stood still, struck by the truth in his answer. She realized Ethan's pride was like glass, sharp but fragile, while Daniel's silence was like stone, strong and unbreakable. In that moment, she began to see where her heart was turning. The next evening, another gathering was held on the rooftop. Ethan had invited more guests, wanting to show his wealth and charm once again. Bright lights shone across the city, music echoed, and glasses of wine filled every hand. The black helicopter stood at the edge of the rooftop, polished and ready, more like a decoration than a machine. Daniel was working near the entrance, mopping quietly as the guests arrived. Most ignored him as usual, though some remembered the last party and whispered about the strange challenge. Claire watched from a distance, her heart heavy with what she knew. She kept thinking of Daniel's words, of the pain behind his silence, and of the truth he carried. Ethan was in high spirits. He walked through the crowd with a wide smile, shaking hands and making jokes. But when his eyes fell on Daniel, his grin turned sharp. He wanted once more to remind everyone that Daniel was beneath him. He clapped his hands to gain attention, his voice rising above the music. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan announced, "you see our janitor here again? Do you remember my challenge? Pilot this helicopter and I will marry you." The man has not answered yet, but tonight is the night. Let us see what he is really made of. Laughter spread among the crowd. Some clapped, others smirked, expecting Daniel to lower his head again. Claire felt her chest tighten. She wished Ethan would stop, but she knew he would not. He thrived on pride and humiliation. Daniel placed his mop aside. He looked at Ethan, then at the helicopter. His steps were calm as he walked forward. The guests began to murmur, surprised that he was not backing down. Ethan's smile faltered for a moment, then returned as he crossed his arms and waited. Claire could hardly breathe. She watched as Daniel reached the helicopter. His hands touched the side of the machine with a quiet familiarity. He opened the door and climbed inside, his movements smooth, practiced, not hesitant. The crowd grew silent, their laughter fading into stillness. The blades began to turn. The hum filled the air, rising into a roar. Daniel's face was steady, his hands moving with confidence over the controls. Ethan's eyes widened, his jaw tightening as he realized this was no act. Claire's heart raced faster with every second. The helicopter lifted slowly, the wind from the blades sweeping across the rooftop, sending gowns and ties fluttering. Gasps rose from the guests as the machine rose higher and higher into the night sky. Daniel guided it with ease, circling the city skyline, the lights of the buildings shining below. His movements were precise, smooth, the kind of control that could only belong to someone with true skill. The crowd watched in awe, no one speaking, no one laughing. Claire's hands trembled as she held the railing, her eyes fixed on the machine that glided above. She felt both fear and wonder, her heart tied to every movement. After a few minutes, Daniel brought the helicopter back down. The landing was smooth, perfect, as if the machine had touched the ground like a feather. The blades slowed until silence fell once again. Daniel stepped out calmly, his face unchanged, his steps steady. No one laughed now. The guests stared at him with wide eyes, whispering to each other in disbelief. Ethan stood frozen, his pride shaken, his words turned against him. Claire's chest filled with emotion, her eyes shining as she looked at Daniel. She had seen the truth with her own eyes, and it had stunned everyone around her. Daniel picked up his mop again without a word. But nothing in that moment was the same as before. The rooftop was quiet after Daniel stepped out of the helicopter. The guests who had laughed earlier now whispered in low voices, their eyes following him as he walked back toward his cart. No one could understand how a janitor could control a machine with such skill. They had seen his hands move with ease, steady and sure, as if he had been born to fly. Ethan forced a smile, trying to recover his pride. He clapped his hands once and said loudly, "Well, I suppose even a janitor can surprise us sometimes." His laugh was forced, thin, and it did not carry the same power as before. The guests did not laugh with him. They only looked at Daniel, who stood in silence, holding the mop as if nothing had happened. Claire felt her chest rise and fall with heavy breaths. Her eyes never left Daniel. She had expected him to have some skill, but what she had seen was far greater. It was not the clumsy effort of a man trying to prove himself. It was the smooth precision of a pilot who knew the sky like the back of his hand. She wanted to run to him, to ask 1,000 questions, but she held herself back. Later that night, when the party ended, Claire found Daniel near the service elevator. She walked quickly to him, her voice shaking. "You were amazing," she said. Daniel looked at her for a moment, then lowered his eyes. "I did what I know," he said simply. "Why do you hide it?" Claire asked. "Why let them mock you when you have that skill?" Daniel hesitated, then sighed. "Because it is not just skill. It is memory. Memory hurts." His words pressed on her heart. She wanted to ask more, but he pushed his cart away and disappeared down the hall. Claire stood there, her hands trembling, her thoughts tangled between curiosity and sorrow. The next morning the building was alive with talk. The guests from the party had shared the story, and soon the entire company knew about the janitor who had flown the CEO's helicopter with flawless control. Some admired him, some doubted, but all were curious. Workers who had once walked past Daniel without notice now looked at him with respect, whispering as he passed. Ethan, however, was furious. His plan to humiliate Daniel had backfired, and now his own guests admired the janitor more than him. He called Daniel into his office, glaring at him from behind his desk. "You embarrass me, Ethan," said sharply. "You think one trick makes you special? You are still nothing here? Do you understand?" Daniel met his eyes calmly. "I did not try to embarrass you. I only answered your challenge." Ethan's fists tightened. He wanted to fire him, but something in Daniel's steady gaze made him hesitate. Instead, he leaned forward and hissed, "Stay away from Claire. She is mine, and I will not have a janitor stealing her attention." Daniel said nothing. He only turned and walked out, his silence stronger than any words he could have spoken. That evening, Claire found him again in the lobby. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then whispered, "Do not listen to him. He fears you because he sees your strength." Daniel gave a faint smile, though his eyes carried sadness. "Strength is not what he thinks it is," he said. "Real strength is knowing when not to fight." Claire's heart ached as she listened. She felt drawn to him in a way she could not explain, as if his soul carried a truth she had been searching for her whole life. And in that moment, she knew that her story with Daniel was only beginning. Days passed, but the memory of Daniel flying the helicopter stayed in everyone's mind. Workers whispered about him in the hallways, and guests from the party spoke of him as if he were a legend. Yet Daniel continued his work as if nothing had changed. He swept floors, cleaned windows, and pushed his cart through the building with the same steady pace. Claire could no longer stay silent. She wanted to know his story, to understand the pain behind his calm eyes. One evening, she found him in the empty cafeteria, sitting alone with a cup of coffee. She sat across from him, her voice soft but firm. "Tell me the truth," she said. "You were not always a janitor. You were a pilot. I need to know why you left it all behind." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, his hands wrapped around the cup as if holding on to something fragile. At last he spoke. "I had a brother," he said slowly. "His name was Luke. We grew up with the same dream. We wanted to fly. We trained together, studied together, and we both became pilots. He was my best friend, my shadow, my other half." Claire listened closely, her eyes never leaving his face. "One day, we were called for a mission," Daniel continued. "The weather was rough. The sky was heavy with storms. I told him we should wait, but he insisted. He wanted to prove himself. I went with him because I could not let him go alone." Daniel's voice grew lower, filled with weight. "The storm was worse than we thought. Lightning cracked across the sky. The wind pulled at the machine, and then it happened. The helicopter went down. I survived. He did not." Claire's breath caught in her throat. Daniel's eyes were dark with memory. "I carried him out of the wreckage, but it was too late. From that day, the sky felt like a curse. Every time I touched the controls, I saw his face. I left it all. I walked away from the life we dreamed of and took this job because I wanted nothing more than silence." Claire's hands trembled as she listened. She wanted to reach across the table, to take his hand, but she held back. His pain was raw, deep, and sacred. "You blame yourself," she whispered. Daniel gave a faint nod. every day. There was silence between them. Claire felt her heart break for him, but she also saw the strength in the way he carried that pain. He had chosen a simple life, not because he was weak, but because he bore a wound that few could endure. At that moment, Ethan entered the cafeteria. His eyes narrowed as he saw them sitting together. He walked over quickly, his voice sharp. "So this is where you spend your time, Claire?" "With him." Claire stood, anger flashing in her eyes. "At least he is honest," she said. "At least he is not full of pride and cruelty." Ethan's face turned red. He glared at Daniel, pointing a finger at him. "Stay away from her. If you think flying that helicopter makes you special, you are wrong. You are nothing." Daniel stood slowly, his calm gaze fixed on Ethan. "If I am nothing," he said, "then why are you afraid of me?" Ethan froze, his words stuck in his throat. Claire watched in silence as Daniel walked past them, leaving the cafeteria without looking back. For the first time, Ethan felt powerless. And for the first time, Claire knew her heart was no longer his. The building felt different after that night in the cafeteria. Workers no longer looked at Daniel as only a janitor. They gave him nods of respect when he passed, and some even whispered thanks, though they were not sure why. They had seen his quiet strength and knew he carried something rare. Claire's heart grew heavier each day, torn between the life she was supposed to have with Ethan and the truth she now saw in Daniel. Ethan tried to pretend nothing had changed, but anger burned inside him. He knew Claire was drifting away. He tried to pull her closer with expensive gifts and lavish promises, but she no longer cared for his wealth. Her thoughts returned again and again to the night sky, to the sound of the helicopter blades, and to the steady way Daniel had guided the machine as if it were part of him. One evening, another gathering was held in the grand hall. Ethan stood before the guests, speaking of his power and his plans. Claire stood beside him, her red dress shining, but her eyes were distant. She saw Daniel at the edge of the room, cleaning quietly, unnoticed by most. Yet to her, he was the only one who seemed real. When Ethan stepped away for a moment, Claire walked over to Daniel. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "You cannot hide anymore. You are not meant to live in the shadows. I know your pain, but I also know your strength. Do not bury yourself because of the past." Daniel looked at her with steady eyes. "The sky took my brother. I cannot take it back." Claire shook her head. "No, but you can honor him. You do not need to fear the sky forever. You showed us all who you are that night. You cannot pretend to be less than that." Their words hung in the air, and for a moment it felt as if time stopped. Daniel lowered his gaze, and Claire felt her chest ache. But before either could say more, Ethan returned. His eyes blazed when he saw them together. "Enough," Ethan snapped. "You think you can take her from me? You are nothing but a janitor who hides behind a mop." Claire turned on him, her voice sharp and steady. "You are wrong. He is more than you will ever be. You tried to humiliate him, but his truth stunned you. You built your life on pride while he carries his life on strength. I will not stand beside a man who mocks others. My heart is chosen, and it is not you." Gasps spread through the hall. Guests stared in shock as Claire spoke with fire in her eyes. Ethan stood frozen, his mouth open, his pride crumbling in front of everyone. Daniel tried to speak, but Claire stepped closer to him, her hand brushing his arm. "I do not care about wealth or titles," she said. "I care about truth, and you are the only one here who carries it." For the first time in years, Daniel's calm eyes softened. He saw not pity, but belief shining in her gaze. His voice was quiet but sure. "If you choose me, you must know my path is not easy." Claire smiled faintly. "I do not want easy, but I want real." The crowd remained silent as the two stood together. Ethan could only watch as his power slipped away. His challenge had brought them together and it had destroyed him. Daniel and Claire walked out of the hall side by side, leaving behind the glittering lights and hollow laughter. Their story was not built on wealth or pride, but on truth, loss, and the courage to face the sky again. And from that night forward, their souls were bound in a love that could not be mocked.